There is a very specific type of rage that bubbles up when you're standing in your own driveway, holding a box of your own dishes, while two police officers ask to see your ID. Why? Because the Homeowners Association president didn't like the brand of moving truck I rented. She thought she was running me out of the neighborhood. She didn't know I was taking my keys, walking exactly 1 block over, and becoming her new landlord. You don't really own a house in Maple Ridge. You just finance the privilege of living in Susan's terrarium. I bought my place on a Tuesday in October. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch. Brick facade. Decent yard. Nothing that belonged on a magazine cover, but it was mine. Or so my mortgage paperwork claimed. The illusion shattered exactly 4 days after closing, before I had even unboxed my coffee maker. I was standing on my front porch at 7:00 a.m., holding a mug of instant coffee, staring at the frost on the lawn. That's when the golf cart appeared. It was an electric Easy Go, customized with a beige vinyl enclosure and a flashing yellow hazard light on the roof. It whined up the street, hugging the curb, before aggressively jerking into my driveway. The suspension squeaked under the weight of the driver. Susan stepped out. She wore a pristine white tennis visor, though I would bet my life savings she had never swung a racket. A thick silver whistle hung around her neck, resting against a pastel polo shirt. But it was the clipboard in her hand that held the real power. It was aluminum, scratched at the corners, and thick with laminated paper. "You're the new owner," she said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. "David," I said, offering a hand. She didn't take it. She looked at my hand like I was offering her a dead bird. Then her eyes darted to my front door. "Your trim," she said, her voice a sharp, nasal drone. "It's eggshell. The approved color palette for this subdivision explicitly mandates Navajo white or alabaster for exterior trim. Eggshell is a violation of Article 4, Section B." I blinked. The coffee in my mug was still lukewarm, but it suddenly tasted like battery acid. "The previous owner painted it last month to sell the house." "Ignorance of the covenants is not an excuse," Susan replied, clicking a red pen. "You have 30 days to rectify the violation. After that, it's a $50 fine per day. Welcome to Maple Ridge." She ripped a yellow carbon copy off her clipboard, slapped it against my mailbox, and drove away. That was day 4. Over the next 3 years, I learned that Susan didn't just run the HOA. She wielded it like a blunt instrument. Maple Ridge wasn't a community. It was an open-air prison for the middle class. We had 72 homes, all arranged in a neat, looping subdivision that fed into a single main road. And Susan controlled every square inch of it. The CCNRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, was a 140-page document that read like a dystopian novel. Grass could not exceed 2.5 inches. I know this because Susan actually walked the neighborhood with a wooden ruler. If your garage door was left open for more than 15 minutes, you got a letter. If your trash cans were visible from the street on a non-pickup day, you got a fine. One summer, Mr. Henderson, an 80-year-old retired mechanic who lived 3 doors down, hung a small American flag on his porch. It was slightly faded from years of use. Susan fined him for displaying dilapidated, unapproved textiles. Henderson fought it. He went to the board meeting, his hands shaking with anger, and brought his military discharge papers. Susan sat at the head of the folding table in the community clubhouse, adjusted her glasses, and told him that patriotism didn't exempt him from community standards. She wasn't just strict, she enjoyed it. You could see it in the tight, smug little smile she wore every time she slid a violation notice under a windshield wiper. She fed on the micropower. In the real world, Susan was a retired middle manager from a regional logistics company. In Maple Ridge, she was a god. Most people just took it. They paid the fines, they painted their doors Navajo white, they planted the exact species of azalea dictated by Appendix C. They complained in hushed tones at neighborhood barbecues, constantly checking over their shoulders to make sure the beige golf cart wasn't creeping down the street. I tried to keep my head down. I run a custom cabinetry business. I work hard. I pay my taxes. And when I come home, I want to drink a beer on my patio without a drone flying over my fence to check if my patio furniture is on the approved list. Yes, she actually bought a drone. But staying off Susan's radar was impossible. She hated me because I didn't fear her. When she handed me a fine for my grass, I didn't apologize. I just took the paper, folded it, and put it in my pocket. That drove her insane. To a tyrant, compliance isn't enough. They demand submission, and because I wouldn't submit, she made it her mission to break me. The war officially started over a van. My business, oak and iron cabinetry, was finally taking off. I was pulling in bigger contracts, outfitting kitchens in high-end developments across the county. To keep up with the workload, I bought a second work vehicle, a standard white Ford Transit van with my company logo neatly decaled on the side. I brought it home on a Thursday evening and parked it in my driveway. I knew the HOA rules. Commercial vehicles couldn't be parked on the street overnight, but driveways were acceptable as long as the vehicle wasn't an oversized box truck. The Transit fit the parameters perfectly. Friday morning, there was a bright orange sticker slapped directly onto the driver's side windshield. Not a piece of paper under the wiper, a sticker, the kind with industrial adhesive that requires razor blades and an hour of swearing to scrape off. It read, "Unauthorized commercial vehicle. Towing imminent." I peeled what I could of the sticker off, my fingernails scraping against the glass, and marched down the street to Susan's house. Her property was sickeningly perfect. The lawn looked like plastic. The bushes were trimmed into sharp, geometric shapes that defied nature. I rang the doorbell. She answered wearing that same tennis visor, holding a cup of tea. She looked at me, then at my paint-stained work boots, and physically recoiled. "You put a sticker on my windshield," I said. My voice was low. I was trying very hard to hold on to the last frayed thread of my temper. "You parked a commercial vehicle in the subdivision," she replied smoothly, taking a sip of her tea. "It's an eyesore. It brings down the property values. The bylaws state commercial vehicles under 10,000 pounds are permitted in driveways," I countered, reciting the rule I had explicitly checked the night before. Susan smiled. It was a terrible, thin-lipped thing. "The board held an emergency session last night. We amended the bylaws. No commercial vehicles with visible branding are permitted anywhere on Maple Ridge property, including private driveways. The revised rules were emailed out this morning." I stared at her. "You changed the rules in the middle of the night just to fine me?" "The board acted in the best interest of the community. If you don't like it, you can park your van at a commercial lot outside the neighborhood." She stepped back and began to close the door. "Oh, and the fine for the sticker removal is $75. Have a blessed day." The door clicked shut. I stood on her immaculate porch, the blood roaring in my ears. I didn't kick the door. I didn't scream. I just turned around and walked back to my house. But in that short walk, something fundamentally shifted inside me. I was done. I wasn't going to fight a rigged game where the dealer could change the rules every time I drew a good hand. I was going to leave. But simply selling my house and retreating felt like a failure. It felt like letting Susan win, as she would just stand in my driveway, clipboards in hand, and terrorize the next poor bastard who bought my place. I spent that weekend looking at real estate listings, furiously crunching numbers on my laptop. I had a good amount of equity in the house, and my cabinetry business was generating solid, consistent profit. I was pre-approved for a substantial commercial loan, originally intended for a new workshop space. Then I saw it. Right at the entrance of Maple Ridge, bordering the main road, sat a miserable, neglected strip of property known as the Oak Street Block. It consisted of a crumbling, single-story commercial strip mall, currently housing a failing laundromat, a vacant storefront, and a sad-looking insurance office, and 4 attached duplexes sitting right behind it. Geographically, it looked like it was part of our neighborhood. It shared our entrance road, but legally it wasn't. It was an unannexed parcel of land that predated the Maple Ridge development by 20 years. Susan hated the Oak Street Block. She talked about it at every HOA meeting. She called it a blight. For years, the HOA had been trying to pressure the owner, an absentee landlord living in Florida, into selling it to them. Susan's grand vision was to bulldoze the commercial buildings, tear down the duplexes, and build a massive gated entrance for Maple Ridge, complete with a brick guardhouse. It was her white whale. The listing had gone up 3 hours ago. The owner in Florida had finally died, and his kids were liquidating the estate. They wanted a fast, cash-heavy close. The property was zoned mixed use. I looked at the property lines on the county GIS map. The Oak Street block literally bordered Susan's meticulously landscaped HOA entrance signs. The only road in and out of Maple Ridge ran directly through the center of the Oak Street parcel. The HOA had an easement for the road, but they didn't own the land on either side of it. I picked up the phone and called my broker. "I want it," I said. "Whatever they're asking, offer asking, but I need this kept entirely quiet. The buyer is listed under an LLC, Oak and Iron Holdings. No personal names attached until the ink is dry." The next 30 days were a blur of inspections, bank meetings, and silent, seething anticipation. Every time I drove my work van home, Susan would slap another fine on my door. $100, 300, 500. She sent me certified letters, threatening to put a lien on my house. I ignored them all. I didn't attend the HOA meetings. I didn't argue. I just kept packing my house into cardboard boxes, smiling every time the golf cart rolled past. Susan thought she was breaking my spirit. She thought the boxes I was carrying to my garage meant she had won. She had absolutely no idea. Moving day fell on a Tuesday in late July. The heat was oppressive, the kind of thick, humid air that feels heavy in your lungs and makes your shirt stick to your spine the moment you walk outside. I backed a 26-foot U-Haul truck into my driveway at 7 a.m. The air brakes hissed loudly, echoing off the vinyl siding of the surrounding houses. The ramp dropped with a heavy metallic clang that shattered the suburban silence. It was a beautiful sound. My crew from the cabinet shop showed up an hour later with breakfast sandwiches and iced coffees. We didn't mess around. We formed a line, hauling boxes, furniture, and tools out the front door and up the ramp. I was carrying my mattress out the front door when I heard it, the high-pitched mosquito whine of an electric motor. Susan's golf cart came around the corner far too fast, the suspension bottoming out as she hit the dip in the curb. She slammed on the brakes right at the edge of my property line, the tires skidding slightly on the hot asphalt. She vaulted out of the cart. The clipboard was firmly in hand. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the humid air. I paused, resting the mattress against my knee. "I'm moving, Susan. You got what you wanted. I'm out of your hair." You would think she'd be thrilled. You would think she'd throw a parade. But no. For Susan, the victory wasn't enough unless the departure was on her terms. She looked at the U-Haul, her eyes narrowing. "You are in violation of community bylaws," she said, tapping her pen against the aluminum board. "Moving vehicles exceeding 2 axles are not permitted on residential driveways. Furthermore, you failed to submit a move-out authorization form to the board 48 hours in advance." I laughed. I actually threw my head back and laughed. "Susan, I am literally leaving. What are you going to do? Find me?" "I will hold your escrow," she threatened, stepping closer to the truck. "I will place a lien on this property before the title transfers, and I will have this truck towed. It is obstructing the sidewalk." The ramp of the U-Haul was hovering about 3 inches over the concrete sidewalk. Technically, you could walk under it if you ducked. "Move," I told her, picking the mattress back up. "I'm busy." I walked past her, my shoulder brushing hers. I loaded the mattress into the truck and turned around. She was standing in the middle of my driveway, blocking my guys from bringing out the couch. "You are unauthorized to proceed," she yelled, her face flushing, an angry, mottled pink. "I am ordering you to cease packing operations immediately." My foreman, a massive guy named Hector, looked at me, holding one end of a sofa. "Boss, you want me to just walk over her?" "Just wait, Hector," I sighed, wiping sweat from my forehead. Susan reached into the pocket of her pastel polo and pulled out her cell phone. She dialed 3 numbers with dramatic flair. "Yes, 9101, she said loudly, making sure I could hear every word. "I need officers dispatched to Maple Ridge immediately. I have a hostile individual illegally operating a commercial vehicle and trespassing on community property. He is threatening me." I leaned against the side of the U-Haul and crossed my arms. "Really, Susan?" "The police will explain the law to you, David," she sneered, folding her arms to mirror mine. "You don't get to flout the rules just because you're running away." It took the cops 20 minutes to show up. In that time, the neighborhood had started to gather. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open. Mr. Henderson was standing on his porch, down the street, leaning on his cane, watching intently. A black and white cruiser turned onto the street, its lights flashing silently. 2 officers stepped out. They looked exhausted, clearly annoyed at being called to a suburban driveway on a 90-degree morning. "All right, who called?" the taller officer asked, hooking his thumbs into his duty belt. "I did, officer," Susan said, instantly softening her voice, playing the role of the terrified, besieged community leader. "This man is violating our homeowners association rules. He has a massive commercial truck illegally parked, blocking a pedestrian walkway, and he became incredibly aggressive when I asked him to comply with our standards." The officer looked at the truck. He looked at the ramp hovering over the sidewalk. Then he looked at me, covered in sweat, holding a roll of packing tape. "Is this your house, sir?" the officer asked. "Yes, sir. Just sold it. Moving out today." I handed him my driver's license. The officer glanced at it, handed it back, and turned to Susan. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter. He's packing his house. There's no crime being committed here." "He is in violation of the bylaws," Susan insisted, jabbing a finger at her clipboard. "He owes over $3,000 in unpaid fines. You need to stop him from leaving until the HOA is compensated." The second officer sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Lady, we don't enforce HOA rules. We enforce the law. If he owes you money, take him to small claims court. Have a good day." They turned to walk back to their cruiser. Susan was vibrating with rage. The veins in her neck stood out. "You cannot just let him leave. He is banned. He is permanently banned from Maple Ridge property. I want him trespassed." The taller officer stopped and looked back. "He owns the property, ma'am. He's allowed to be here." "I am officially revoking his community privileges," she shrieked. She turned to me, pointing a shaking finger. "You hear me? You are banned. Once that truck leaves, if you ever set foot on Maple Ridge streets again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." I smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile. The kind of smile you earn after months of eating dirt. "I hear you loud and clear, Susan," I said quietly. I turned to Hector. "Load up the last of the boxes. We're done here." 10 minutes later, the back of the U-Haul was locked. I climbed into the cab and rolled the window down. Susan was still standing in the driveway, writing furiously on her clipboard, probably drafting some final, meaningless violation. I started the engine, put the truck in gear, and pulled out. I didn't drive far. I drove exactly 500 feet down the street, past the manicured lawns, past the pristine brick houses, and pulled the U-Haul into the crumbling asphalt parking lot of the Oak Street block. I parked it directly in front of the vacant storefront, right next to the neighborhood entrance sign. I turned off the engine, grabbed the heavy iron keys the title company had handed me yesterday, and stepped out of the truck. I was home. The Oak Street block smelled like stale cigarettes, ancient dust, and wet cardboard. I unlocked the door to Unit B of the duplexes. It was a time capsule from 1985. The carpet was a matted, rust-colored shag. The kitchen linoleum was peeling at the corners, curling up like dead leaves. But as I walked through the empty rooms, listening to my boots thud against the floorboards, the air felt lighter than it ever had in Maple Ridge. The heavy, oppressive weight of constant surveillance was gone. Hector and the guys spent the afternoon unloading the U-Haul, moving my personal belongings into the duplex and staging my heavy shop equipment in the vacant commercial storefront attached to the front of the lot. We propped the massive glass doors wide open to let the July heat bake out the dampness. By 3 p.m., my guys were drinking cold Gatorade on the tailgate of my pickup. That's when the familiar, high-pitched whine drifted down the main entry road. Susan's beige golf cart crested the slight hill by the neighborhood entrance. She was driving right down the center of the road that the HOA had an easement to use, which happened to slice directly through the middle of my newly acquired asphalt. She slammed on the brakes. From where she sat, the visual was a nightmare. My 26-foot U-Haul was parked across 3 faded parking spaces. My white, heavily branded commercial Ford Transit van was idling near the sidewalk. Hector, a man whose tattoos had their own tattoos, was sitting on a stack of drywall, eating a bag of chips. Susan didn't just walk over, she marched. Her tennis visor was pulled low against the afternoon sun, her aluminum clipboard held tight against her chest like a shield. She stopped exactly 3 feet from the bumper of my van. "I explicitly informed you," she barked, her voice echoing off the brick facade of my new building, "that you are permanently trespassed from Maple Ridge. This lot is zoned for community aesthetic compliance. You cannot park these vehicles here. Move them immediately, or I am calling the towing company. I finished the last sip of my water, crushed the plastic bottle, and tossed it into a trash bag. I walked down the 2 concrete steps of the storefront and met her on the asphalt. "Susan, I think you're confused," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I'm not confused, David. I am the president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. This commercial blight falls under our entrance covenant. We have an active, signed agreement with the property owner that grants us the authority to maintain the visual integrity of this corridor. Now, remove these vehicles." "You had an agreement," I corrected. She blinked, just a rapid flutter of her eyelids. "Excuse me? You had a handshake agreement with an 82-year-old man in Florida who didn't care enough to tell you to get off his lawn," I explained, taking a step closer. "He let you pull weeds and plant your little petunias around the entrance sign because it saved him a landscaping bill. But he died, Susan. The estate liquidated the parcel." "I am fully aware the property sold," she said, her voice tightening. A faint, blotchy redness started to creep up her neck. "The board is already in contact with the holding company that purchased it, Oak and Iron Holdings. We are drafting a formal compliance mandate to ensure the new developers adhere to our aesthetic standards." I reached into the back pocket of my jeans. I pulled out a standard white business card and held it out to her. She stared at it for a long moment before snatching it from my fingers. She adjusted her glasses. Printed in simple, bold black letters, Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC, David Miller, owner and managing member. I watched her read it. I watched her read it a second time. I watched the exact second the reality of the situation fractured the glass walls of her tiny fabricated kingdom. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the business card, then at me, then at the massive, ugly, commercial strip mall stretching out behind me. "This road," I said, pointing to the asphalt ribbon that connected her precious neighborhood to the main highway, "is an easement. It means you and the residents have the legal right to drive your cars over it to get home. That is all. You don't own the road. You don't own the grass next to the road. You don't own the dirt under the grass." "I do." You bought this?" Her voice was a dry rasp. The authoritarian boom was entirely gone. "Cash," I lied. "The bank owned a good chunk of it, but she didn't need to know that. Closed yesterday, and my very first act as the new owner is officially revoking any and all permissions the HOA had regarding this land. No more board mandates, no more petunias, and if you ever threaten to tow one of my vehicles off my own property again, I will have your golf cart impounded for trespassing." She took a step backward. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the clipboard. She looked like someone had just told her the sky was green. In her mind, she was the mayor, the police chief, and the judge of this zip code. The idea that someone could buy the land right out from under her, legally severing her jurisdiction, was a concept her brain simply refused to process. "This is illegal," she whispered. "It's real estate, Susan." I turned my back on her and started walking toward the storefront. "Stay off my grass." I didn't look back, but Hector did. He grinned, raised his bag of chips in a mock salute, and watched her slowly climb back into her golf cart. She didn't speed away. She drove away at 5 miles an hour, staring straight ahead, the yellow hazard light on her roof flashing a silent, pathetic retreat. If I thought Susan was going to quietly accept defeat, I was dangerously underestimating the psychology of a petty tyrant. When someone whose entire identity is built on enforcing trivial rules loses their power, they don't surrender. They weaponize the system. Over the next 4 weeks, my life became a revolving door of city officials. I was renovating the vacant storefront into a state-of-the-art cabinetry workshop. It meant running new electrical panels, upgrading the ventilation, and installing heavy machinery. We were working 12-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and the adrenaline of a new venture. On a Tuesday, a man in a hard hat and a high-visibility vest walked onto the property. He was a city zoning inspector. "Got an anonymous complaint," the inspector sighed, looking at his tablet. "Someone claimed you were running an unlicensed industrial manufacturing plant in a residential zone. Said you were dumping toxic chemicals into the storm drains." I showed him my mixed-use commercial zoning permits. I showed him the water-based, eco-friendly stains we used. I showed him the sawdust extraction system I just spent $12,000 installing. He checked the boxes on his tablet, apologized for wasting my time, and left. 3 days later, the fire marshal showed up. The complaint stated I was storing explosive materials next to a residential duplex. I opened my storage closet and showed him 3 cans of standard paint thinner stored in a fireproof lockbox. He rolled his eyes, signed off on my inspection, and left. Then came the health department. A report claimed there was a severe rodent infestation on my property, threatening the neighborhood. The inspector didn't find a single dropping, but he did find Hector sweeping the floors to a mirror shine. Susan was calling the city every single day. It was exhausting. Every time a white city vehicle pulled into my lot, my stomach tightened. I was doing everything by the book, but constant scrutiny wears you down. You start second-guessing your own paperwork. You start waking up at 3 a.m., wondering if you missed a signature on a sub-permit. It was a psychological war of attrition, and she was trying to bleed me out through bureaucracy. But Susan's obsession was blinding her to a critical miscalculation. Maple Ridge wasn't just Susan. There were 71 other houses in that subdivision. 71 families who had spent years being fined for the shade of their mulch and the height of their fences. They were watching. It started with Mr. Henderson. I was standing in the parking lot late one evening, exhausted, covered in a fine layer of oak dust, staring at the exterior of my building. It was a faded, ugly beige. I hated it. I heard the slow, rhythmic click of a cane on the asphalt. Henderson was walking down the sidewalk from the neighborhood. He stopped at the invisible property line, the exact spot where the HOA jurisdiction ended and my land began. "Evening, David," he said, his voice raspy from decades of smoking. "Evening, Mr. Henderson. What brings you out past curfew?" He chuckled, a dry, coughing sound. "Needed a walk. I see you've had a lot of official visitors lately. City trucks, fire trucks." "Yeah," I said, wiping my forehead with the back of my arm. "Susan's keeping the dispatchers busy." Henderson leaned heavily on his cane. He looked at the massive commercial building, then back toward the pristine, eerily quiet streets of Maple Ridge. "You know, for 5 years, that woman has made my life miserable. She fined me $100 last month because my grandson parked his bicycle on the front porch while he went inside to use the bathroom. $100 for a 10-year-old's bicycle." I stayed quiet, letting him talk. "We all thought she was untouchable," Henderson continued, looking at my dirt-stained boots. "The board is rigged. The elections are a sham. We just accepted that this is how you live if you want a nice, safe street. But you," he gestured with his free hand toward my property, "you didn't just stand up to her. You bought the ground she walks on. It's the finest thing I've seen since I got back from Korea." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy glass bottle of small batch bourbon. He walked across the property line and handed it to me. "Keep hammering, son," he said. "The whole neighborhood is rooting for you." Oh, that bottle of bourbon changed my entire perspective. I wasn't just defending my business anymore. I was putting on a show, and if Susan wanted a front row seat, I was going to give her a spectacular view. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store and bought 30 gallons of exterior paint. The HOA Covenants, Appendix B, Section 4, clearly stated, all exterior structures within the visual corridor of Maple Ridge must be painted in approved earth tones, specifically restricted to Navajo white, alabaster, or desert sand. I didn't buy alabaster. I bought a deep, rich, aggressive shade called midnight charcoal. For the trim, I chose a vibrant, striking, industrial rust. My crew and I spent the entire weekend painting the storefront. We didn't rush. We took our time. We blasted classic rock from a boombox on the sidewalk. By Sunday evening, the building looked incredible. It looked modern, sleek, and entirely out of place next to the beige conformity of the neighborhood behind it. Monday morning, the golf cart arrived. I was drinking coffee on my front steps when Susan pulled up. She stared at the charcoal gray building. Her mouth hung open. She didn't even reach for her clipboard. "You painted it black," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Charcoal," I corrected, taking a sip of coffee. "It really makes the natural wood signs pop, don't you think?" "It's a violation," she said, sounding almost desperate. "It's a visual assault. You are destroying the property value of every home in this community." "I checked the county ordinances, Susan." I smiled. "There are no color restrictions on commercial properties in this zone. Not a single one. I could paint it neon pink with purple polka dots if I wanted to. She stared at me, her eyes wide behind her glasses. For the first time, I didn't see anger. I saw panic. "You're doing this just to spite me," she said, her voice dropping an octave. I stood up, walking down the steps, until I was standing right at the edge of the asphalt. "No, Susan," I said quietly. "I'm doing this because I own it, because I can. You spent 3 years trying to make me feel small in my own home. You changed the rules, you slapped stickers on my windshield, you threatened my livelihood over a work van. You wanted me out." I gestured to the massive, dark building behind me. "I'm out. I am completely, legally, permanently out of your jurisdiction. But you still have to drive past me every single day." She didn't argue. She didn't cite a bylaw. She just put the golf cart in reverse and backed away, her eyes locked on the dark gray walls of my shop. That was the day the balance of power permanently shifted, but Susan couldn't let it go. If she couldn't control me, she was determined to control the people who were watching me. But she doubled down. She started patrolling the neighborhood twice a day. Fines skyrocketed. She was lashing out like a cornered animal, punishing the residents for my defiance. And that was exactly the mistake I needed her to make, because while I owned the commercial lot, there were 4 residential duplexes sitting right behind it, 8 rental units, and my first round of leases was about to begin. The 8 rental units behind the commercial storefront were identical, mirror image floor plans. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, with small concrete patios facing the street. They had been neglected for a decade. The carpet smelled like old pennies and wet dog. The appliances were the color of nicotine. I didn't gut them. I just made them bulletproof. We ripped out the carpet and laid down heavy-duty, waterproof vinyl planking. We swapped the leaky faucets for industrial-grade fixtures, threw on fresh coats of paint, and installed heavy steel doors. It took my crew 3 weeks of night shifts to get them ready. When the for rent sign finally went out by the road, I didn't list the units on standard real estate websites. I didn't care about credit scores in the 800s. I pinned a simple flyer to the bulletin board at the local hardware store, the diner downtown, and the plumbing supply warehouse. The headline was written in thick, black marker, "No HOA. Work trucks welcome." My phone rang within an hour. The first person to sign a lease wasn't a stranger. It was Mr. Henderson. He walked into my shop on a Tuesday morning, leaning heavily on his cane, holding a manila folder. He looked older than he had a month ago. The circles under his eyes were bruised and dark. "I'm selling my house," he announced, dropping the folder onto my workbench. "Listed it yesterday. Cash buyer swooped in, closing in 2 weeks. I'm done, David." She sent me a letter threatening foreclosure over the weeds in my side yard. I can't bend down to pull them anymore, and my grandson is out of state for college. I just can't fight her. I wiped sawdust off my hands. "Where are you going to go?" "I saw your sign," he said. He tapped the counter. "I want Unit A, the one right on the end, ground floor." I gave him the keys that afternoon. I charged him half of what the market rate was. When Henderson moved in, he didn't just bring his furniture. He brought his defiance. The very first thing he did before even unpacking his kitchen boxes was drill a heavy steel bracket into the brick beside his front door. He hung an enormous brand new American flag. It snapped proudly in the summer wind, instantly visible to every single car entering or exiting Maple Ridge. Susan sent him a violation notice the next morning. It was tucked into his screen door. Henderson laughed until he choked, crumpled it up, and threw it in the gutter. He didn't live in her terrarium anymore. By the end of the month, all 8 units were occupied, and I curated my tenants with the precision of a museum director building an exhibit on everything Susan hated. Unit B went to a master electrician named Greg, who drove a massive dual-axle Ford F-350 utility truck. It had ladder racks, side-mounted toolboxes, and a backup alarm that beeped loudly every morning at 5:30 a.m. Unit Ozzy was rented by a pediatric nurse named Sarah. She was a single mom with 2 kids, 3 tricycles, and a golden retriever that liked to sleep on the concrete patio. The tricycles were always left outside. They were brightly colored plastic, scattered across the grass like a suburban minefield. Unit D went to a guy who fixed outboard marine motors on the weekends. He parked a 20-foot aluminum base boat right in his assigned parking space. By August, my property looked like a working-class neighborhood. It was loud, it was messy, it was entirely alive. The sweet smell of barbecue smoke drifted over the property line every weekend. The sound of country music and clinking beer bottles echoed off the brick walls, and Susan had to drive through it every single day. The HOA easement, the main road into Maple Ridge, was essentially a canyon cutting through my land. My commercial shop sat on the left, the duplexes sat on the right. To get to her pristine Navajo white subdivision, Susan had to run a gauntlet of work trucks, boats, American flags, and children drawing heavily with sidewalk chalk. It broke her brain. She started slowing her golf cart to a crawl as she passed, glaring at my tenants. She installed 2 high-definition security cameras on the Maple Ridge entrance sign, angling them directly onto my property. I retaliated by installing a 4,000-lumen industrial floodlight on the corner of my roof, aimed precisely at her cameras. At night, her footage was nothing but a blinding, cinematic lens flare. She called the police for noise complaints. The police arrived, saw it was 6 p.m. on a Saturday, asked Greg about his truck, and left. She called the EPA, claiming the guy with the base boat was leaking engine oil into the groundwater. The EPA inspector found a perfectly dry patch of asphalt and cited Susan for filing a false report. She was bleeding control, and her panic began bleeding into the neighborhood. Because she couldn't touch me or my tenants, she took her frustration out on the residents of Maple Ridge. The fines became absurd. She cited a family for having their sprinkler system run 3 minutes past the designated watering window. She fined a woman $50 because her cat was sitting in the front window without a collar. She walked the streets with a tape measure, checking the distance between decorative lawn gnomes and the curb. The neighborhood, which had always been quiet and subservient, started to boil. They saw my property. They saw Henderson sitting on his patio, drinking bourbon, petting a golden retriever, perfectly at peace. They realized that the sky didn't fall when a work truck was parked in a driveway. They realized the aesthetic purity Susan enforced was a prison they were paying for. The illusion of her authority was gone. And when a tyrant loses the illusion, they usually make a fatal mistake. Susan's happened on a Tuesday in late September. I was in the shop, running a piece of cherry wood through the thickness planer. The machine was screaming, a high-pitched mechanical roar that drowned out the world. Hector tapped me on the shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just pointed out the large glass windows toward the street. A flatbed tow truck was backing down the Maple Ridge entrance road. The truck was bright yellow, aggressive, and totally unmarked. No company logo, no dot numbers. A rogue operator. It was backing straight toward Greg's F-350 utility truck. Greg was at work, carpooling with a buddy that day. His massive truck was parked squarely in his assigned spot in front of Unit B. But the left rear tire, maybe 2 inches of rubber, was resting on the white painted line that separated my parking lot from the HOA easement road. Susan was standing on the curb, arms crossed, wearing her pristine tennis visor. She was directing the tow truck driver, pointing frantically at the tire. I hit the kill switch on the planer. The silence in the shop was sudden and heavy. I didn't run. I walked. I picked up my cell phone from the workbench and pushed open the heavy glass doors. The September air was crisp, signaling the end of the brutal summer heat. "Hold on a second," I called out, stepping onto the asphalt. The tow truck driver, a guy with a thick beard and grease-stained jeans, paused. He had a heavy steel hook in his hand, preparing to drop it under Greg's front axle. "This vehicle is obstructing a private community roadway," Susan announced loudly. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking at the driver. "Hook it up. You have authorization from the property management." I stopped about 5 feet from the tow driver. I looked at the hook, then at him. "Buddy," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Do you know whose property you're standing on right now?" The driver frowned, looking between me and Susan. "Lady said she represents the HOA, said this truck is parked illegally on their easement." "The easement covers the asphalt from the white line to the curb," I explained, gesturing to the ground. "The truck is parked on my private commercial lot. That tire is touching the line. If you hook a chain to that axle, you are stealing a vehicle from private property. I have 3 high-definition cameras recording you right now. I will call the police, I will report it as grand theft auto, and then my lawyer will sue you, your boss, and your insurance company into the ground." The driver dropped the heavy steel hook. It hit the pavement with a loud, metallic clatter. "Excuse me," Susan shrieked, stepping forward. "I signed the authorization. Tow the vehicle." The driver looked at Susan. He looked at the massive F-350. He looked at me, standing perfectly still, with my hands in my pockets. Then he pulled a smartphone out of his pocket and tapped the screen a few times, pulling up the county GIS property lines. He zoomed in. He swiped. He sighed. "Lady," the driver growled, turning to Susan. "He's right. The boundary is the white line. You don't own the parking space. I can't tow a truck off private property without the owner's signature. I am the president of the HOA. I don't care if you're the Pope," the driver snapped. He bent down, picked up his hook, and secured it back to the flatbed winch. "You call me out here for an illegal hook again. I'm billing you for my time." He climbed into the cab of the yellow truck, slammed the door, and drove away. Susan and I were left standing on the edge of the road. She looked small, stripped of the tow truck, stripped of the police, stripped of her bylaws. She was just an angry woman standing on a piece of asphalt she didn't own. "You think you're so smart," she hissed, her voice trembling. The clipboard was shaking against her chest. "You think you've won." "I don't think about you at all, Susan," I said softly. It was the truth. "But they do." I pointed behind her. Down the street, standing on the pristine sidewalks of Maple Ridge, were the residents. Mr. Henderson was sitting on his patio chair across the lot, watching. But behind Susan, a crowd had gathered. Sarah, the nurse, was standing near the entrance sign. The guy with the lawn gnomes was there. A dozen residents had walked down the hill to see the commotion. They had heard the tow truck. They had heard the yelling, and they had watched Susan, their terrifying, untouchable dictator, get publicly humiliated and shut down by a tow truck driver. They saw that she had absolutely no real power. Susan turned around. She saw the faces of her neighbors. No one was smiling. No one was waving. They were just staring at her with cold, exhausted contempt. She didn't say another word. She turned, walked stiffly to her golf cart, and drove up the hill. She didn't use the flashing yellow light this time. The annual HOA board election was held 4 days later. I obviously couldn't attend. But Mr. Henderson went as a proxy for an old friend. He came to my shop the next morning carrying 2 coffees, a massive grin splitting his wrinkled face. "A bloodbath," Henderson said, taking a sip of his coffee. "An absolute bloodbath. The residents hadn't just voted Susan out. They had organized a complete coup. The entire board was replaced. The new president was a 40-year-old accountant who immediately put forth a motion to suspend all aesthetic fines and dissolve the Architectural Review Committee. She stood up at the front of the clubhouse," Henderson recounted, shaking his head in awe. "She tried to give a speech about property values. Someone in the back, I think it was the Henderson kid who parked his bike on the porch, yelled, 'Sit down, Susan,' and she did. She just sat down. Without her power, Maple Ridge was intolerable to her. She couldn't stand walking her dog and seeing a trash can left out on a Thursday. She couldn't stomach the sight of a slightly yellowing patch of grass. She was a warden trapped in a prison that had opened all its doors." 3 weeks later, a moving truck backed into her meticulously edged driveway. It wasn't a U-Haul. It was a premium, white-glove van line. I watched it happen from the roof of my shop, leaning against the parapet wall. I watched the movers carry out her pristine beige furniture. I watched them load her matching patio set. And finally, I watched the beige EZ-Go golf cart get pushed up the ramp into the back of the truck. Susan pulled out of the neighborhood for the last time in a spotless silver sedan. She drove down the easement road. She passed my charcoal gray building. She passed Greg's massive work truck. She passed Henderson, who was sitting on his patio, cleaning a set of golf clubs. She didn't look left or right. She stared straight ahead, her hands gripping the steering wheel at exactly 10 and 2 until she merged onto the highway and disappeared. I climbed down from the roof. The shop was humming. Hector was cutting a beautiful slab of walnut for a custom island. The air smelled like fresh wood and hot coffee. I walked out to the edge of the asphalt, right where the white painted line separated my world from the rest of the neighborhood. I took a deep breath. There was a very specific type of peace that settled over the block that morning. It wasn't the sterile, forced silence of compliance. It was the messy, loud, breathing sound of people just living their lives. And right there, standing on my own concrete, I finally felt at home. If you've ever dealt with a petty neighborhood tyrant, you know that the best revenge isn't anger, it's outgrowing them completely. Taking Susan's power wasn't about being cruel. It was about buying back the peace of mind she stole from an entire community. Sometimes you just have to buy the dirt to change the rules. If this story hit close to home, or if you just love seeing a suburban dictator finally get handed a massive reality check, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real estate stories and drop a comment below with your absolute worst HOA nightmare. See you in the next one.